So good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Fertility and Robert Half Collaboration Forum. This is week 5 of our new series, and it's great to see you all here. My name is Paul Middleton. I'm a Managing Director in Fertility, and as usual, I'm joined here today by my colleagues from Fertility, as well as by my colleagues from our sister company, Robert Half. Our aim of this series, entitled Opportunity and Adversity, is to inspire us and to push ourselves further as we face up to the challenges of the period ahead. Lockdown, a fragile UK economy, a looming Brexit, but it isn't all doom and gloom, hopefully. Within this adversity, we believe there lies opportunity. And so we've created this forum to enable us to debate those topics and issues that are most important to you, such that you can better navigate the challenges that lie ahead and seize any opportunities with greater confidence and speed. We've covered a number of topics so far in this series. We started by discussing people versus profit, moved on to culture versus technology, the pros and cons of different leadership styles, and last week we looked at how we should best manage, inspire and grow our people during and beyond this new lockdown. This week, we're very excited to be taking a different angle by focusing on the economic trajectory and impact of the pandemic and understanding its current and likely future impact on one of our hardest hit industries, hospitality. Before we do that, I want to remind you, as normal, of a key ingredient that we need to make this morning's meeting and forum a success, and that's your participation, because without this, there is no debate. So I'm afraid I'm going to be consistently encouraging you to come off mute, stick your hand up, be bold and say what you think, or at least write it in the chat. If you're dialing in, you may need to press *6 to take yourself off mute. And if you're on a computer, you can unmute yourself at any time. But whatever you do, please get involved. So why are we framing this forum as a debate? Well, we believe that now more than ever is the time for us and you, our client, our partner, our friend, to plan and deliver change. Because more than ever, without change, without disruption, we run the risk of rapidly becoming irrelevant in the dynamic world that we're living in. And we think that if you can hear a number of different perspectives that dig deeper into the topics that are important to you, it will help you make bolder decisions and hopefully the right decisions. So the topic for our debate this week is the outlook for the UK economy and when and how those industries most affected by the current lockdown will be able to thrive. In September, the IMF reported that the pandemic would cost the world 28 trillion in lost global output, with the UK economy shrinking by almost 10% this year alone. We've hit a tragic milestone of 50,000 COVID-related deaths in the UK, but with a vaccine in sight, should there be a cause for optimism at a macro or micro level? Hospitality has been one of the hardest hit sectors in lockdown 1 and has now been hit hard again in lockdown 2, a time at which should be the busiest of the year for the sector. Yesterday, the chairman of Wetherspoons said that the November lockdown will cost his business £14 million and expressed concern over the timescale for the ending of temporary regulations. So how quickly can this key industry recover from the impact of the pandemic, and what stimulus is needed to support the hospitality and similar industries at this time, both locally and nationally? These are just some of the points we'll be discussing today, where we hope that the insight you hear from our panelists will help you navigate the challenges in your own business with greater confidence. Before we do this, we'd like to gauge how COVID has impacted your business. And to do this, and again, I apologise in advance, I know it's just after 8 o'clock and this is a little bit bold, but I'd like to ask everyone just to take part in an online survey where you can tell us anonymously how COVID has impacted your business at a very broad level. We don't want to hear any trade secrets. In order to do that, and this is very easy, I promise, you'll see that my team is sharing a link in the chat. And if you click on that link, it will take you to an online poll powered by our partners at Menti. And this will take you less than 30 seconds, I promise. It's completely anonymous, it's secure, and we'll see the consolidated results shortly. And you'll see from the team that's being shown in the team's main screen at the minute that you can click on just click on a link, and then you click on the topic. The question will ask you In the context of the pandemic and Brexit, how long will it be until your business recovers to pre-COVID revenue levels? And please just pick one option from the drop-down list. Any challenges from that, please just let us know in the chat. So again, I'd like just to ask you all to take 30 seconds to do that. And while we wait for the results, I'd like to introduce today's panelists. So firstly, I'm delighted to welcome back John Ashcroft. John joined us in the first series, and as you may remember, he specialises in economics, strategy and financial markets, working with professional firms, large corporates and SMEs. He's the author of The Saturday Economist, his weekly blog published on a website of the same name that many of you probably subscribe to, discussing the UK and world economy. John specialises in viral modelling, and it's this unique combination of modelling, economics and financial markets that's resonated with so many of you when he spoke before. And so now, as we're back under lockdown, we thought it'd be great to hear an update from John. So we're very pleased to welcome him back today. Next, I'm delighted to introduce William Lees-Jones. William is a managing director of Manchester brewer J.W. Lees, which operates 150 pubs, inns and hotels in the northwest of England and North Wales. As well as his role at J.W. Lees, William is chairman of the Manchester Grammar School Trust, president of Forever Manchester, a director of the British Beer and Pub Association, and a director of the Independent Family Brewers of Britain. William is a former High Sheriff of Cheshire and a former member of the Business Leadership Council to the Association of Greater Manchester Local Authorities, and a founder director of Onside Youth Zones. And again, delighted that William can join us today. So just before we let our protagonist loose, I'd just like to take a quick look at the results from the poll, please, if my team could just show those on the screen. So asking the question of how long will it be before your business recovers to pre-COVID revenue levels, most of you, or rather the majority of you, are looking like it's going to be sometime in 2022. So you're probably factoring in the impacts of Brexit into the beginning of next year as well. Good to see that. I guess the fewest of you are thinking 2023. So and also that you will achieve those levels. But basically, most of you looking at 2022, maybe the second half of 2021 coming in at second place. So that's. I'll let our panelists reflect on that. But that's a good gauge to see how it's affects the cross section of everyone here. So thank you very much for that. John, if I may turn to you first then, please, sir. If you'd like just to bring us up to date from when we last spoke with some opening comments, maybe around what the shape of the pandemic has been since we last spoke and your views on the output curve.
Yeah, I think we've got to looking at the level of activity within the economy and the forecast for GDP. Specifically, you mentioned the IMF forecast. So today we've seen the roundup of the figures for Q3 with the data reported for September. And what we find in the data reported today is that year on year, the economy is down by about 10%. And this is exactly in line with the forecast that we were talking about earlier in the series. What we saw was the impact of the epidemic and the shutdown was to bring GDP down by 20% in the second quarter. And what we were envisaging was a recovery by halves. So down by 20% in the second quarter, down by 10% in the third quarter, and down by about 5% in the final quarter of the year. So this is our vision, our expectation before the second wave of lockdown. Now, the IMF more or less got it correct. We would expect the economy to shrink overall by 10% this year, and we'd see a continued recovery, slow recovery into the first quarter of next year. And then, from an economics point of view, bearing in mind, we always compare, in our shop, we always compare the forecasts or the actual figures with a year-on-year comparison, not this monthly growth rate, not the quarterly growth rate, not the quarterly growth rate, then annualized. I'm old school. We look at how it compares with prior years. So down 20% in the second quarter, down 10% in the third quarter. Those are the actual figures released today. And we'd expect it to be down by 5% in the final quarter of the year, down 10%. Then when we get into next year, by the time you get to Q2, the figures you're fighting are so low that you're going to see a very positive bounce back in terms of the comparisons with the prior year. So most economists now expect growth in 2021 to be about 6%, but actually it could be much higher. It could even be as high as 10% because you're comparing it with such very low figures. Now, since again we talked, we've seen two things happen now. First of all, the move into lockdown. And the move into lockdown is obviously going to be damaging for certain sectors and specifically accommodation and food. But generally, this won't change the outlook for the year overall. Some minor adjustments, perhaps. But what we saw was, in the last quarter, manufacturing was down 6%. We thought it was going to be down by 10%. Construction was down by 12% or 13%. We thought it'd be down by 15%. And even in the accommodation and food sector, that looks to be down by 30% in Q3. Very, very damaging figures, but actually it's slightly better than we had thought at one stage. So yeah, the recovery remains on track. What shape will it be? It's a V. It's always been a V since 1933, is what we say. And there's no change to those patterns of growth. So down 20, down 10, down 5, down 10% for the year as a whole. So yeah, so far we're on track.
Thank you, John. William, if I may turn to you then, please. Do you think you could just share some brief opening perspectives for our attendees, just so they can understand JW Lee's and your journey through the pandemic so far, please?
Certainly. Just to give you some background, we're a sixth-generation family business. And whenever you go to a family business event, the family member will always come up with the same line, which is, I don't want to be the person that turns the lights off in our shop. And so we've been living with a combination of paranoia and huge amounts of government interference or guidance, whatever you'd like to call it. So, on the 20th of March, we were given 5 hours notice to close all of our businesses. And that was a nightmare, but I think we all understood as we were going into lockdown 1 that there was a national emergency. And I'll never forget that Friday night because I did loads of work and then I made sure I got to my local pub and I bought everybody a drink. And people were saying, could you please stay away from me? People were very frightened. And so we then shut for 106 days and we opened our business between the 4th of July and the 9th of September. And so really important point, we actually took a couple of months to reopen the business because we wanted to do it correctly. We wanted people to feel safe. And so to put it in perspective, when lockdown 2 came along last week, on Wednesday night, I went back to the same pub to buy everybody in the pub a drink, but completely different atmosphere. People no longer trust the government. I couldn't get a table in the pub. Everybody was saying, we'll see you in 28 days' time. And I think that at the moment we're in a position where the government has sort of lost the narrative. And it feels like we're entering about Act 4 of a Shakespearean tragedy.
Yeah. Okay. No, thank you, William. So, as we've discussed in previous weeks, people are the lifebloods of our business, and yet we see unemployment rates up almost kind of to 5% for the 3 months of September, with a record of 314,000 redundancies for that period as well, which in the new lockdown will have more than likely worsened. John, if I could maybe then start with you again, what do you think is the likely unemployment trend we're going to see, and when is it likely to recover to pre-pandemic levels?
Well, the new shutdown has changed the perspective for the year in one sense, but mainly because it's pushed Rishi Sunak to extend the furlough scheme until the end of March next year. So most economists, which I was one, were pushing for that extension through to the end of the Q1 next year anyway. So the belief is that by doing so, he acted a bit late. The other schemes, interim schemes, were very well put together. But the extension of the furlough scheme will push, it's thought, is going to push the peak in unemployment. The Bank of England certainly has this view that we thought it was going to peak at the end of December or the end of Q4 this year. Now it's expected to push the peak back a little bit towards the end of Q1 next year as we move into Easter. So the furlough scheme has pushed it back, we think, but for many businesses it was acting too late, and certain people, more redundancies will have taken place certainly in October. And the extent of the unemployment, the bank expects unemployment to rise to about 2.5 million. Most pessimistic forecasts were estimates of 3.5 million. That's 3.5 million by December. Now, currently, the view is that that peak has been pushed back. It's now not going to be as high, but we could still be looking at 2.5 to plus towards 3 million unemployed as we move into the end of Q1 next year. But hopefully not, because I think what we see is in the US that certain sectors that have been the brunt of the redundancies, especially in hospitality and hotels and leisure, they're very elastic, very flexible. The bounce back becomes very quick in that sector. So hopefully the forecast won't need to be too pessimistic. But yeah, so the furlough scheme has pushed the peak back, but it's still going to be looking at 2.5 million plus at some stage over that period.
Thank you, John. William, from your perspective, you've been at the sharp end of this. How have you looked to manage your people through what must be an emotional and financial roller coaster of the last few months? And how do you think the shape of your leadership teams, as well as your wider teams, are going to change in the future?
Well, when we went into lockdown, I started doing a daily blog, and I quickly ran out of material. And so daily became weekly. We then had a virtual conference at the beginning of September. And so we had about 1,000 people join in using various different devices. And we start from the principle that we have an incredibly strong management team, but we overnight went from 1,450 people in the business to 28 in March. And so we went into survival mode. And how we kept the sort of stickiness together has been quite complex, because each pub, each hotel is its own little microcosm of activity. And so, for instance, when the Chancellor gave us Eat Out to Help Out in August, we actually took on 104 new colleagues in August for us to be able to cope with that huge demand. And so, as John said, hospitality jobs, there's 3 million of them, which is why the Chancellor has, I think, picked us out, because he can see that we can employ a lot of people very quickly. For most people, their first ever job is in hospitality, and people learn things like you've got to turn up on time, you've got to look the customer in the eye, very basic skills, but we can then develop people. So to answer your question, we've communicated quite hard, and we've been able to fast track and induct people in the business so that they can look after guests safely. But we've also had to be incredibly flexible. So, for instance, last Friday, we were about to bring everybody back to work at our head office, but then the Chancellor changed the rules of furlough on the Thursday afternoon. So we stood everybody down on the Sunday. And I think that you've got a lot of people who are sort of teetering on the brink of mental illness, because the uncertainty with which people are living is just too much. And if I was being cynical, I could have said, look, all of this could have been predicted. Back in March, people said we're going to have a second wave in November. And the good news is that the NHS has got much better at dealing with the disease. And then, of course, last week's big optimistic discovery of a vaccine potentially makes people feel good, and so the stock market comes back. But the one thing that the Chancellor, I'm very angry with him at the moment for, is that we were banking on over £1 million in our cash flow in January with the £1,000 job retention scheme bonus, and he's just pulled the rug again. And so this is a really difficult government, because I don't think as business people we have confidence that they have a recovery plan that they can deliver.
So, William, just to dig into that a little bit then, and the effects on your workforce. So, have your employees, when you shifted down to those 28, have you seen your employees look to retrain and redeploy to other sectors, or have they largely remained kind of ready to come back to you, having been furloughed? What's your observation of the kind of, I guess, the macro trend there?
I think for a lot of people, particularly the middle classes, being paid 80% furlough to stay at home and watch Netflix is the best thing that's ever happened to people. I think that the downside is that it's going to be devastating on many of our city centres because, if you look at today's call, there's loads of people here. I've not had to catch the train to London or wherever to speak at some conference. The tech side has accelerated massively. But, we're a cuddly hospitality business. And so, for last Monday, when colleagues were coming back to work, not been into work since March, we bought a bunch of helium balloons and we've got welcome backpacks done, all that sort of stuff. You can only do that so many times. And, for me, someone said at the beginning of this, it's not going to be the survival of the fittest, it's going to be the survival of the fattest. And whether we like it or not, daily cash, it's the first thing I look at every day. I've not looked at daily cash for 20 years. And so from a cuddly employment perspective, there's lots of tech ways where we can communicate with people. People are pretty resilient. People are not in hospitality are great optimists, but you've got to believe that there's going to be a future and we're not all going to disappear. Otherwise, we might as well all give up.
Yeah. John, then, if I may just turn back to you, from your perspective, maybe from both a kind of a micro and macro perspective, what do you think then are the key uncertainties facing those industries most affected by COVID, like Williams' hospitality industry, but also other ones, leisure, airlines, airports, tourism, and so on? What are the key uncertainties they're facing at the minute?
I think Williams talked about it quite clearly. The biggest uncertainty is the government policy, because there's no sense of, first of all, there's no sense that there's any belief or understanding of business. This applies to so many issues, and it applies to the management of the COVID crisis, and it applies to the developments as we move towards the Brexit. There's no sense of comprehension of anything related to understanding how business works. So, the shutdowns applying to a short notice, the lack of, and it's also the lack of vision and continuity planning. So we've seen, Rishi Sunak was the darling of the markets and the darling of business going back to March and April. Now he's been pushed off the dishy slot. Apparently Andy Burnham, if you watch those ladies who lunch, Andy Burnham's now the hottest sex symbol amongst politicians in the UK. He's pushed alongside Brad Pitt, and he'll be the next James Bond if they have their way. So loose women rate Andy Burnham now, and Rishi Sunak has piled down their ranking. And that's largely because there's no see-through with Andy Burnham, with Rishi Sunak at the moment either. So, we're all begging for a continuity right from the start of the furlough scheme through to Q1 next year. In the end, we've got it. But we had a mishmash of interim policies which was not effective. So the biggest challenge is trying to understand what is the government framework, what is the problem is they appear to be reacting to a series of focus groups and opinion polls, and that's swinging policy. So, we had no budget this year, we had a shambles of a winter statement. And unless you get that sense of framework, then that can't give confidence for business to plan forward, because there's enough uncertainty related to COVID, and there's a lot of uncertainty relating to Brexit. But you have to have a sense of belief that there's a dialogue taking place between business and government, and there's not. And there's a sense of understanding within government of business. And this is probably, each successive administration gets worse from my point of view. But that's one of the biggest challenges.
So maybe just picking up on that last point then, John, and William, turn to you. Has the voice of business leadership in your mind been sufficiently united and loud enough during the pandemic to guide policy?
I'll jump in. The reason I've been doing media stuff is that business has been incredibly quiet. And I got fed up with Tim Martin from Wetherspoons and Luke Johnson, chairman of Bust, Patisserie Valerie, telling the rest of us how to go about business. And I think that within listed businesses, you've got lots of chief execs who are busy rewriting their LTIPs, and they're too busy and too scared to put their head above the parapet. And so I took a view, do you know what? We're a family business. We can say things that PLCs can't say in terms of what our sales figures are. what the daily impact is, and we can see it every day. And like I said earlier, I'm in Wales this morning. Wales has only been open 3 days. It's really, really positive. And I do think that business needs to be challenging government in a robust manner in terms of how we get the show back on the road. And I think that what we can see is that there's businesses who've done very, very well out of lockdown. And suddenly, from an ethical perspective, there are businesses who are paying back their furlough money and other grants that they've received. And there's other businesses like hospitality who have really, really suffered and who need every penny. And if we're going to come through this with things like airports and airlines and travel businesses who've had no help at all, then the sort of help needs to be directed towards specific sectors, and we need the leaders of those sectors to speak up.
And William, we've got a lot of business leaders on this call today. How do those business leaders then best speak up? How should their voice be, I guess, both united and loud to positively influence government policy?
Well, what I do, I've limited myself to 1 letter a week. So we trade in 26 different constituencies, and I write a letter to all of our MPs every week. I'm also in contact with Bays, who are responsible for business. And what I found particularly is if you put hashtag sack Matt Hancock on a tweet, that politicians really notice what you say about them on Twitter. It's a bit like complaining about an insurance company or a car warranty, that people are really concerned about their social media. And so I've become a bit shouty about it, and it seems to be working. People seem to be phoning me up and saying, you seem to be speaking a bit of sense. And so I would just say that, we're living with social media, use social media, write in the traditional manner. And it's quite weird because, like I said, the other day I wrote 26 letters to 26 MPs. One of them replied to me with a direct message on Twitter. One of them, I got a postcard from the House of Commons saying that your communication has been received and we will get back to you in good time. And so every single MP is basically running a small business, and they all need to be approached in different ways. But we are seeing backbenchers starting to be heard because people are not happy with some of the decisions that are being made with very, very little evidence on the back of a focus group and what a couple of people in Downing Street are thinking in their gut.
Yeah, lucky you might be getting a fax from somebody soon as well, maybe William. But I think that there is a framework within the UK that you have very good organisations like the Federation of Small Business, and you have the Chambers of Commerce, and you have the CBI, and they are recognised frameworks for garnering opinions from within their membership group. And you talk about a huge number of businesses, and there is a channel by which they communicate and talk to government, and the government set up the discussion groups with those organisations. The problem is, it doesn't matter how loud you are in that framework if people aren't listening. And it doesn't matter how loud you are if they're actually tone deaf to the songs that the business is singing. And this is the problem. So you have a differentiation there between a separation between the backbenchers that William's talking about, where you get Graham Brady railing against government policy. He's the chairman of the Backbench 32 committee. So, this separation, this isolation within this ivory tower of the cabinet and the decision makers from those communications with the business. And in some cases, they're just not listening. There was one group, a friend of mine who sits on one of those committees where Boris Johnson sat in for 10 minutes before shooting off, leaving it to Gove to lead the discussion. Well, God help them all then. So there are recognised frameworks, but at the moment, businesses just are not getting that audience with government that they should be getting. And why on earth Carolyn Fairbairn stepped out on the steps of number 10 and number 11 alongside Rishi Sunak to deliver the Winter Economic Plan, I don't know, because it fell short of so much that business wanted. And it was difficult to understand why the outgoing chief exec or DG of the CBI was standing next to them. So I say, yeah, there is a framework where business communicates, but government really, they've got too much on their plate, but they're just not listening and not reacting to business whatsoever. And that's very disturbing, not just for the epidemic, but it's very disturbing when we look at the imminent, like weeks away from the end of the year and the Brexit, New Deal, or lack of deal. So yeah,
Thank you, John. It's interesting. There's a lot of comments coming through on the chat, and it's great to see those. So thank you for those. I'll try and kind of bring a reflection of those. But I think a lot of people are looking forward as well and saying, right, well, so what can we do about this going forward? But of course, one of the challenges going forward is that in January we're going to have Brexit biting, or biting more. And I guess maybe, William, to start with yourself, I mean, to what extent do you think the extension of furlough until the end of March is going to be delivering a lifeline to yourselves? Or rather, is it a kind of an ominous sign that actually the government's thinking, well, the worst is yet to come here, and we need to be protecting people? I mean, do you agree with that V-shaped prediction that John described earlier, or is it a different letter from your perspective?
No, I'm just a humble brewer. John is a proper economist, so I'm not going to get into economics. But I do think that everything that we do in a business, you've got to have a plan. And at the beginning of the crisis, I think that everybody believed in the plan, and we wanted to protect the NHS, and we wanted to support Major Tom. And we had some really positive heroes in terms of where we needed to get to. And I think that at the moment we're suffering from groupthink in terms of risk aversion. I think some of the things that some of the advisors have done are scandalous. I'm referring to Whitty and Valance in particular, because when you start exaggerating projections, you then start project fear again, and none of those predictions have come true. And so we need more Major Toms. I thought the Brigadier who came out this week, you're not going to mess with him, are you? He's going to get people tested. But again, I challenge, what is the point of testing everybody in Liverpool? Because there's so many people who are going to test positive. My daughter went to university this year for the first time. Everybody in her accommodation block got COVID. Everybody recovered, and everybody is fine and dandy. And so we're about to unleash. All of our students are going to travel up and down the country. Families are going to travel up and down the country. Boris is terrified because he doesn't want to be the first Prime Minister since Cromwell to cancel Christmas. And maybe we need to cancel Christmas. Maybe families mixing together at Christmas is the most stupid thing that we can do, because by bringing multi-generations together, the young may still have the virus. There is no immediate vaccine. So we have to do everything that we can to contain it. And people will think, oh, he's just saying this because he wants to open his pubs. But actually, we've invested as an industry millions in terms of changing our business model so that people can be distant, people can be safe, one-way systems, perspex, etc., etc., etc. And so working in a way where families can be in their homes, people can be in public space, but at the same time being safe in an environment where we don't spread the virus and we don't go into lockdown 3, because going back to the economics, I really don't think we can afford lockdown 3. And I think that lockdown 2 was reckless and was pushed on the Prime Minister with quite out of date data from people who were exaggerating at the time.
William, thank you for that. It certainly resonated with some people who've posted some comments in the chat on that. I mean, John, turning to yourself, do those perspectives resonate with yourself as well? Do you see the challenges around Christmas and some of those other points that William has raised?
I can think of many families who welcome the fact they don't have to get together for Christmas. Because the pressure starts building from the beginning of November to get the perfect family Christmas, and I think by the time, in a lot of households, by the time so much wine has flowed, then it can obviously deteriorate into a bit of a family feud. But yeah, so I think the important thing is to understand from an economics perspective where we think we are and where we're going. And I think what you've got is a remarkable resilience amongst in a lot of businesses and amongst people to see the recovery taking place as we thought it would, even from the beginning of the setback in April. And again, looking forward into next year. So we're not really talking much about the vaccine, but there's a lot of excitement about the vaccine. A lot of work to be done yet to make sure it is safe and will deliver. But that wouldn't change most economists' outlook for 2021 anyway, because most are factoring in a positive recovery of growth of 6.5% to 10% next year. So it all looks pretty good in that space. I think the problem is going to be that for certain sectors, if you look at we talked about hotel and leisure specifically, but you look at aviation. So I was doing the hotel conference last month, and you look at the aviation figures, looking at the passenger traffic figures, basically nobody was flying in from April to April, May and June. The figures were down by 98% compared to prior year. And what we saw was a remarkable recovery in Q3 when passenger numbers were only down by 80% compared to prior year. And in Manchester Airport now, they're consolidating all their passenger activity through one terminal. So even there, the sort of O'Leary from Ryanair was saying his numbers next year, forecasts it could be between 78 to 80% of traffic by the middle of 2021. But previously he was thinking at best he'd see about 50%. Now, approaching those sectors like aviation and the problems that throws on for the aviation infrastructure are huge. And they're going to see setbacks for 1 year, 2 years. So it could take 2 to 3 years before we get back to some semblance of normality in those sectors. So I think that, we should welcome the fact that the recovery is on track. And cancelling Christmas, yeah, maybe. But really, we're looking forward to the recovery next year and what the government should be doing to provide that fundamental see-through support for certain sectors and say, well, yeah, this is our plan for this sector, for not just now, not just 6 months, over the next 3 years. And at the moment, the Treasury won't release the spending plans for defence. So if we don't know how we're going to fuel the tanks at the end of 2021, what thought is that provision for the industries that are really badly damaged and could face a fundamental setback? We know, we've seen the figures, something like 12% of the shops that shut in the phase one that shut down are not going to reopen, as we were talking prior to the session. So a lot of businesses will not come back.
So William, then from your perspective, maybe just building on what John said, we've talked a lot about what's wrong so far, but what are the most practical solutions then you need in the hospitality industry in order for you to thrive going forwards?
What we need is actually what we had back in July, which is loose touch, sensible policies coming from government. And what we've seen since September, it's almost as though the civil service and politicians, they came back from holiday at the beginning of September and they started gold plating all of the guidance and legislation. And so, for me, what we learned in the first lockdown was that we had a plan which we could then execute when we were allowed to reopen. And I'd remind everybody that the uncertainty of reopening, that non-essential retail was meant to reopen on the 1st of June. It got delayed to the 15th. That 2 weeks cost a lot of businesses a lot of money. If you look at a business like AO.com, for instance, that as we went into the crisis, their share price was about 60p. It's now £4. And so for anybody operating in cyberspace on the internet, the acceleration in terms of consumer behavior has, people are saying what would have taken 10 years has happened in 6 months. And so we've got a big structural challenge because, for instance, business rates, in my opinion, are now irrelevant. The government should abolish them. Why should they abolish them? Well, actually, it's not how people want to shop anymore, but we need our town centres to be thriving places full of hospitality, shops and people, not boarded up shops. And so For me, we're going to see, unfortunately, a lot of smaller businesses will run out of cash. Lots of entrepreneurs will seize the opportunity and create amazing businesses. Lots of bad people will defraud the government with fraud and furlough schemes that are sort of false companies, the like. But we do need to adopt a we're all in it together type attitude. And for me, that needs strong leadership from every possible part of society, because we now need to think about how we pay for everything. And the Chancellor needs to fess up in terms of how much it's really cost us and what the policy is going to be in terms of how we repay that. And it's probably going to be a bit like the Marshall Plan.
John, there's been a few comments while William's been speaking around that. I mean, from your perspective, as you look at, I guess, this from a macro perspective, what are your thoughts around? I mean, you've spoken about a V-shaped recovery. What's needed to achieve that? I guess not just for hospitality, but for the wider industries that have been most affected as a whole as well.
Well, I think, one of the fundamentals we always talk about for any business that we're looking at is it safe? Has it got a good structure and framework? And you've got to have from government a policy which offers structure and framework, especially at this time now. So it's got to be able to deliver this framework for businesses as we pull through. But just going back to and also they've got to keep on spending at the moment. The talk about tax rises and capital gains tax rises, that's for another era, because the likes of the IMF and the response are urging central banks around the world to keep on spending. And I just want to touch on the point that we've written about it on the South Economist website, is that in fact the Bank of England has handed the Chancellor this £1 trillion banknote, because all that pretense, I railed against QE for so long, it's always a complete nonsense. No, the pretense of QE has gone. The Bank of England is simply buying the debt from the Debt Management Office. So the Treasury issue the liability, it's scooped up by the Bank of England. And the bank is going to end up with about £1 trillion worth of gilts. This session is completed, probably by the end of the year even, but certainly by the middle of next year. So this £1 trillion largesse offered by the Bank of England is good for the economy in two ways. A, it doesn't cost them anything, because any coupons that are paid to the Treasury, to the Bank of England, have to be paid back to the Treasury, because the Treasury underwrites the debt. And the second beautiful thing is, that nobody's quite grasped yet, is the debt never has to be repaid, because this liability from the Treasury is an asset owned by the Bank of England, and both the Treasury and the Bank of England are owned by government. And at some stage in the future, the debt will simply, like old soldiers, just fade away. It'll simply melt away on a rollover scheme. So the Rishi Sunak, he's got his £1 trillion banknote. He should keep on spending to support the economy, because it costs nothing. It's what we call dire straits economics. It's money for nothing, gilts for free. So why not carry on supporting the economy?
Thank you for that, John. I think so, Hannah. I think we've covered a lot of ground there. We've got a lot of people on the call. There's a lot of comments coming through. I'd just like to open this to the floor, if I may. Does anyone have a particular perspective they want to bring to John or to William, or a question they wish to ask? And even if you've asked it in the chat, if you want to vocalize it.
Come on, team, get yourselves off mute and ask the questions. Right. We've got some great speakers on.
I'll get it. I mean, just reflecting a question that Tony posted in the chat. I mean, and maybe to yourself, John. What sectors do you think will be creating the new jobs and the new wealth?
I think, again, William touched on it. This time last year, I was in Moscow, believe it or not, and we're talking at the gate of Gazprom. We were talking about the threat of digital disruption. Now, which is the likes of what happened to Kodak, or the fact that you could have bought Netflix for £1 million 4 or 5 years ago. But it's not the threat of digital disruption. It is the pace of digital acceleration, that everybody's got to get virtual, they've got to get digital, they've got to get online. And Amazon has become the standard for online purchase by which all others will be judged. So you've got to have a virtual presence. It's all about developing recurring incomes and subscription models. It's all about making sure your UX, your user experience, and your user journey is perfect and meets the standards. So it's that move to digital that's going to be so critical. And we've seen the changes. The events that were predicted to take 3 years have had to transpose within 3 months. So anything related to digital, you've got to get digital and fast. And let's face it, certain sectors have been benefiting specifically from that, the surge, the healthcare model pushing to hell with Peloton, the success of Peloton, and the success of online retail with likes of Boohoo or ASOS or AO. They've been having really whiz times for growth. So a lot of interesting areas for expansion and development, and a lot of the fundamentals, the basic stuff, whether it's manufacturing or construction or the service sector, they're offering good growth. And there's all that nonsense about, okay, the kids have lost their jobs in the pub, they should retrain for the industries of the future. What nonsense that is, because that hospitality will swing back quite quickly, and the prospects of simply retaining to become a coder is not going to be able for so many. So I think there's lots of interesting opportunities moving forward, especially with the fundamental growth that lies in prospect for 2021.
So William, maybe then just turning back to yourself, and again, please, if you do have questions, please free to put your hand up, and I'll come to you. But what do you think then? So you've been through this is the second lockdown you've been through. What key learnings are you taking from that? So as you look forward, what are you taking from that, and how do you think that an industry such as hospitality, most heavily affected by COVID, what changes and adaptations have you got to make in order to be most resilient in the future, in order to survive whatever this future looks like? Do we need to see kind of radical innovation like John's just referred to? What are you looking at?
Because of lockdown and because of the new restrictions, we've changed a number of quite important things in our businesses. And so the investment in tech has made us a better business. Table service has made us a better business. There are things that people have done that, in my mind, are kind of fundamentally stupid. And so, Deliveroo, for instance, has grown very, very quickly. But why would a pub want to offer Deliveroo? That, fish and chips doesn't travel well on the back of a scooter. And so what I think is going to be transformational as we come out of this is that there will be some amazing opportunities for business. And if I go back to 08, 09, the best deal I have ever done was we bought 10 of the very best pubs in the northwest of England off Punch Taverns when they had a problem with their bondholders. And literally they needed cash, and they needed it very, very quickly. And so, for me, at this moment in time, I'm still looking at daily cash. I'm still looking at the CapEx program that we stopped back in March. And so I've got various commitments, but there will come a moment when some people will go quickly, and those people might well go bust, because if they decide to become expansionist at a time when another lockdown then appears, they will run out of cash. And so for me, we are currently regrouping. We're worrying about what Christmas is going to look like, because bear in mind in hospitality that December is worth more than September, October, November, January and March put together. And so whether we have a good December is kind of fundamental. At the moment, we're not quite sure what is going to happen on December the 3rd. But then there will be a moment, probably in about April or May, when everybody feels safe, all the hospitals are empty, most people have been vaccinated, and people will make huge amounts of money. And people will also have run out of steam, and there will be businesses that are closed. And so the thing that I think we've got to be really wary of is that we can't allow lots of great British businesses to be bought on the cheap by American private equity, because without some form of controls, that is what's going to happen.
you also feel, well, actually, let me open again. Let me try that to the floor again, because there must be a lot of people here from other industries that have been affected by lockdown. Do you agree with William's viewpoint there? Is there anything that anyone here is looking at in terms of what you've taken from lockdown 1, what you've taken from lockdown 2, and looking at how you need to most adapt in the future? Okay.
I'm good, thank you very much. How you doing? How are you?
Okay. Sorry, I think if let me just mute someone here. Okay. So, William, just maybe coming back to you on that. What do you then need other businesses to do in order to support your sector? Are there other practical steps that can be taken in order to provide that support, so there's more of that community sense in order to kind of stand up those most ailing industries?
Yeah, quite simply, we got the financial stimulus that Rishi Sunak gave us in April with the ETAT scheme, and I know it's been criticised, but actually, if you look at the hospital admissions 1 month afterwards, it wasn't happening in hospitality, and so it was amazing. We had a record ever August, which was then sustained with a very good September. October and November have been terrible, but we get to a point where there's different levels of government intervention, whether it's positive or negative, that need to be applied. But Britain is fundamentally a free market economy. Coming from Manchester, the birth of the free trade movement, I really believe in as little government interference as possible, but also the sort of responsible form of capitalism that we've always believed in the Northwest. And at the beginning of this talk, you talked about my CV, which was a bit embarrassing because John also advised the Association of Greater Manchester Authorities. And one of the things that I think, and I'm hopefully speaking for you as well, John, that what we have in Manchester is actually a really, really fantastic relationship between government and business, where if it's good for the region, then it just happens. And certainly the example that you gave of Andy Burnham, Andy spoke for Manchester business in a cross-party way when he said, look, you're closing us down and you're saying that 66% is enough. If 80% was enough for the country in March, but then from a political perspective, whether you want to call it a U-turn or not, people sort of changed their minds. The Chancellor came up with a scheme. But I would say to everybody, look to Manchester, because what Manchester does today, the rest of the world does tomorrow, as Benjamin Disraeli once famously said.
William, thank you for that. John, William's touched on a few points there, but one of the themes is also the regions as well. Do you see, in terms of the economic outlook you have, do you think that we will see different shapes of recoveries by different regions as different tiers come in again? What's your outlook for, I guess, stretching into 2021, of how different regions will be performing?
Well, carrying on with my dire straits analogy, we all have our fears for tiers. So I think that when you have this sort of meaningless patchwork of regional variance and the tier variance, and understanding which permit you need to travel from which part of the country to another part of the country, that becomes quite confusing. So the sooner the tiers can be flattened, and hopefully the vaccine might accelerate that process, then the better, really. But I think the big issue for the regions at the moment, William talked about the success we have in Manchester, and he and I did serve together on the Business Leadership Council here in Manchester. What you have is that the communication between business and government, and the sort of common agenda, and we discussed some of the key issues relating to the progress of the city. And it's all about the growth of the city and the region. But on a national basis, the big challenge is to see whether the government is going to step up and support this sort of levelling up process for the northern regions, and a lot of question marks about that. So it comes back, I'm afraid. So you have to. We are a free market economy, but it comes back to seeing that policy framework, and we have to see some semblance of perspective coming out from governments that looks beyond Christmas and looks beyond the March next year, and comes up with a framework. We need to see that budget framework, which gives us that 3-year perspective to support all of the regions as the economy recovers.
But it's not just government, is it? It's banks as well, and also funding structures. I mean, William, are you finding that banks are being sufficiently flexible and supportive at this time?
In a word, we bank with RBS NatWest, and they couldn't have been more helpful. Having said that, I have colleagues who have small businesses who can't even get through to their banks, and I think that some of the, I'm not going to say ill thought out because they were well intentioned, but some of the early measures that the government brought in didn't really work. And so, that's what happens when you make decisions in a hurry. And so we've gone from a position of the Chancellor saying, every job is going to be protected to, well, not every job. And then, as John said earlier, well, some of you might have to retrain. People are generally pretty agile, so to speak. And what worries me is that if we go back to previous recessions, unfortunately, it's the public sector dominated parts of the country that have suffered most, because when government pulls levers, those are ones that it can pull directly. And I do think that we need to acknowledge the amazing work that people in the front line, whether they're dustbin collectors or nurses or doctors, the role that those people have played, because without them, there is no society. And so the sort of general resetting in terms of what our priorities are requires real leadership. And, we need someone to step up to the plate and to give that sense of direction. And I'm afraid at the moment, I don't think the Prime Minister is in the right place, because he's suffered with the illness. He's got Brexit, he's got Corona, he's got everything there. And it's almost as though we need to see that long-term 3 to 5 year plan that actually extends beyond a general election, that can give us some hope on which we can build our future economy.
Thank you, William. So we've 2 minutes to go. So I just want a very quick crystal ball moment from you both, and just to give us some sense of optimism here, almost a yes or no. John, are we going to be able to have a drink in the pub this Christmas?
Yes.
William, do you agree with that?
Yes, but it might be with only members of your immediate family.
In a bubble.
Whether that's optimistic or not, I don't know. Okay, thank you both very much. It's been fascinating. It's been really, really appreciate the candor that you've both offered us this morning. So thank you both to John and William. Thank you ever so much. And thank you also to our attendees. Although you've been very quiet, there's been a tremendous amount of chat coming through, which has been fantastic to see. A lot, William, that's been kind of reflecting what you're saying about, particularly around how I think, is loud is it problematic that loud today is most effective because it basically bypasses the quality filter and leads to those hasty decisions, and so much more. So thank you to all our attendees ever so much. If you do wish to continue the conversation, please feel free to reach out to your colleagues from Robert Half or Protivity. And I'm really sorry if I didn't manage to get to exactly your question, but hopefully I managed to reflect the themes in what we asked to our panelists. Our challenge to everyone here is to put this all into action, to take some of these perspectives you heard, to act on them, to be that united business voice that William and John have referred to, and to really support our ailing industries as we're moving forwards here. Next week we have some more great panelists, including entrepreneur and businesswoman Solveig Biddle, to speak about some of the importance of how the pandemic has altered the role and opportunities for women in the workplace. We'll be covering that and a lot more. So until next week, on behalf of my colleagues at Protivity and Robert Half, I'd like to extend my best wishes to you all. Stay safe, be kind to each other, and we look forward to seeing you all next week. Thank you very much, everyone.